The Queen has arrived. Today, Riot revealed Rek'Sai for Legends of Runeterra, and there are some interesting things in the cards that were revealed today. I know there's 5 on screen, but really it's only 3 cards, and yet there's a lot to unpack. So we're going to dive right in. This is the graphic that Riot released, and it's a little backwards because technically the level 1 Rek'Sai is all the way to the right, so we're not going to be going left to right. We're going to start with Rek'Sai at level 1. This is kind of the marquee place to start in my mind. Rek'Sai is a 3-cost Shurima champion with the Lurker tag along with the Lurk keyword. Has a 3/6 body. Yes, you are not dreaming. This is a 3-cost 3/6, but there are some caveats that I want to talk about. So Rek'Sai's text says, when I lurk or attack, grant Lurker allies everywhere +1/+0. Then it also says round end, place me into your deck. So essentially, if it's in play at round end, it shuffles back into the deck. So yes, it is an overstated body. A 3-cost 3/6 is a lot of stats, but it's not sticking around unless you can level it up. So the level up condition says when I attack with 10 or more power, so think like Vi, except you don't have to strike, just when you attack, that's when she levels up. So when she levels up, says when I level up, create 3 random Lurker followers, my head's covering it, in hand. So levels up, you get additional firepower in the form of the Lurkers. And the good thing about that is that those Lurkers are likely pretty buffed. If Rek'Sai is already at 10 plus power, let's be honest here, you've probably triggered that Lurk keyword or done some sort of buffs about 5 times or more, because you might be playing Rek'Sai, getting those Lurk buffs, and then buffing her to get her over that 10 power threshold. But that buff might be a temporary buff, but you still need a lot from the Lurk. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The level 2 Rek'Sai we'll cover here real quick, and then I want to come back and talk about the impact of the level 1. Level 2 Rek'Sai gets the standard +1/+1 treatment, so it is a 3-cost 4/7, gains the overwhelm keyword, keeps the Lurk keyword, and it still says when I lurk or attack, grant Lurker allies everywhere +1/+0. But the round end portion is gone. So once you level her up, she is going to stick around. She is ready to feast at that point. So with that in mind, I want to talk about the pros and cons of this level 1 Rek'Sai. Pros. This is one of the cards that you can use for multiple Lurk triggers in a round. Now, it's not truly multiple Lurk triggers because one is the Lurk and then one is the text on Rek'Sai, but in previous videos I had said that one of the things this archetype needs is either reliable ways to trigger on your off rounds, meaning when you don't naturally have the attack token, and I know we have the Bilgewater unit with the free attack that helps with that, or you needed ways to trigger it more than once in a round, and so Rek'Sai fills that kind of role. But it's also kind of important to note how that works. So it says when I lurk or attack, you grant Lurker allies everywhere +1/+0, but that text that grant Lurker allies everywhere +1/+0 is separate from the actual Lurk trigger. Now, if you don't remember, or maybe you do remember, but you're still kind of fuzzy on the details, Lurk triggers when the card that's lurking is on the top of your deck. So if Rek'Sai is on the top of your deck and you attack, Rek'Sai lurks, and then also on top of the Lurk trigger does her text trigger. Now I'm going to be really interested in seeing if there's an additional animation specific to Rek'Sai, or whether or not it just happens twice, or if it's just straight up a +2/+0 when that happens. I'm curious what kind of visual cue you're going to get, so that if you're playing against this Lurk archetype, how do you identify whether it was Rek'Sai on top or just a card with Lurk on top? Because that is information you'll want to know. I mean, that is something that you'll be able to see one way or the other from the triggers, but it also tells you as the player, okay, they have a Rek'Sai is coming. So just kind of pointing that out. There might be some sort of additional visual cue, but even if there's not, just look for the +2/+0 when you would expect a +1/+0 on the Lurkers. So if Rek'Sai's on top and you attack, the Lurk triggers and you get the text. Or if Rek'Sai is in play and it attacks, you get the +1/+0 just from the attack. And then if there's a different card on top with Lurk, you still get that Lurk trigger as well. So that still could be a +2/+0. But the nice thing with Rek'Sai is even if you don't trigger Lurk, let's just say it's bad RNG in your favor, or we just don't have enough of a critical mass to consistently do it, whatever the case may be, then at least Rek'Sai gives you a trigger. It's like a guaranteed trigger, assuming you get to attack with Rek'Sai. Now, that's the other issue here. So cons, let's talk about cons for Rek'Sai. The first most notable con is that round end. And that is in fact a con because it means that on round 3, if you're playing her on curve, you are very likely not going to keep her around. So that is a con, because if you're swinging with a 10 or more attack power Rek'Sai on round 3, then I guess you just deserve to win anyway at that point, right? Like, you've done something insane, but the reality is you're probably not doing that. Now, it still could be worth it to play her on round 3, because if you get that double trigger, it really ramps up your long-term game plan, but your short-term tempo in terms of establishing a presence on the board is just not going to be that great at that point. Even more so when you consider that the only 2-cost Lurk unit we've seen thus far is the free attack one. So if it's, you know, a round 1, you play the 1/1 fearsome, round 2, maybe you take that free attack, and then it's Rek'Sai round 3 as opposed to the predict one. You're stuck with, you know, a 1 health fearsome. Yeah, it's scaled, and then that unit that started as a 0/2 and got you that free attack. It's just not a very impressive board is what I'm saying. So there is a chance for kind of slow starts, it feels like, with this archetype. And I had said in a previous video, I fully expect this to be kind of that slow burn mid-range deck, where by the time you hit the mid game, the low cost, high value threats are going to be what kind of turns the corner for this archetype. That's what I expect. But it is worth noting that Rek'Sai on 3 is not necessarily great. I think I would actually prefer the predict unit over Rek'Sai on 3 most of the time. Now, there could be, again, wacky scenarios. Maybe round 1 is the 1-drop and round 2 is 2 more of the 1-drops. And so then round 3, Rek'Sai into a double trigger means, you know, a big fearsome swing potentially. I'm not saying that there's not times you don't enjoy playing Rek'Sai or whatever, but anyway. Pros is if you've triggered at least 1 Lurk before playing Rek'Sai, that means that when it does come down in those early rounds, she's basically unkillable. Like, let's be honest. The 3/6 means theoretically she could die to Culling Strike, but again, very likely to have received 1 buff by then. And the 6 health at that stage of the game means, again, very likely to survive damage dealing effects. I suppose if somebody saved all of their mana and they're sitting on like 2 Get Exciteds or whatever else that deals 3 damage, that's one option. Blocking with a unit, and then when the unit dies, catching it with a black spear is another option. I'm not saying that there aren't ways to kill her. I'm just saying that they are not high in number. She will essentially be unkillable. Also, your opponent's going to have to weigh their own pros and cons about whether it's even worth it to kill her, knowing that it's going to go away at the end of the round. So you kind of get that as a pro, but again, it goes away at the end of the round, so that's a con. Another potential con is that Rek'Sai, when it's not leveled up, you never get it in an open attack. You can't play it the round before to set up an open attack. It's going to go away. And so that means every time you're planning to attack with Rek'Sai, your opponent will get at least 1 opportunity to respond. And that opens up additional counterplay. What do I mean by that? Well, somebody plays Rek'Sai and you now pass the priority, you can stun it. So it doesn't even have to be a fast speed. You could just catch it with like a guile, for example. And now you've denied the Rek'Sai trigger. And if they don't have other units to attack as well, if they were relying on Rek'Sai for the attack, but also potentially triggering Lurk, well, then that's an even bigger deal, right? So, you know, in scenarios where maybe you lead off with the 1-drop and you don't have necessarily a great 2-drop, or you know, even if you do, maybe one of them gets blocked and then they Mystic Shot your 2-drop, or they Vile Feast the 1-drop and block the 2-drop, whatever the case may be. If you're rolling into round 3 and you play Rek'Sai with the intent of attacking, yes, Rek'Sai is mostly indestructible at that point. It is very disruptible, and Thank you, Creative Cloud, for that ding while I'm recording. I love you so much. So much for that. Yeah. I feel like stuns and other things like that are, you know, potentially counterplay. Now, I was saying earlier there's no way to set up open attacks. I guess I'm technically wrong. If you really want to play Rek'Sai and then hush your own Rek'Sai, you could set that up. But in that case, you'd have to be also playing Targan and have the 6 mana and... yeah. So anyway, I don't think that's going to be the line of play most of the time. So Rek'Sai, I think, has a lot of pros and cons. I think it's a very important addition to the archetype. I like the champion. Obviously, Rek'Sai is a very nice payoff. Yesterday's video, I was saying that I was not necessarily impressed with the 6-drop Overwhelm, because in most cases it felt like it was going to be just an alpha Wild Claw most of the time, which is like good enough, but I think Rek'Sai is actually your bigger payoff here. But it's also got those potential pros and cons in the early parts of the game. What interests me the most about Rek'Sai is how those decisions will impact play patterns. And it makes me a bit sad that I suspect this archetype might be a bit underpowered. We're going to have to wait and see. Pike could push it over the edge, but right now it just feels like a pretty standard mid-range deck. Kind of similar to Overwhelm. Not that Overwhelm's not viable, it's just not like a meta buster, right? I love playing Overwhelm, and you can absolutely win with Overwhelm. It's just not necessarily a meta buster. And so I think that this archetype almost feels too fair. And fair in card games is rarely competitive, like at the highest tiers. I don't know. I hope I'm wrong, because it's very cool. And the reason that I'm kind of lamenting this is that I think there are really interesting decisions and play patterns built into the archetype. Whether or not you predict before you attack. How many lurkers do you run versus support cards so that you have the proper levels of potential triggers, right? It's the old deck building puzzle that you used to have to do with like Mist Wraiths, for example, to make sure you were hitting those allegiance triggers. But now it's even more important, because it's more than just like, do I whiff on my Wraith Caller? Now it's literally every attack you're factoring it in. And so how much do you want to increase those odds, etc., etc. Rek'Sai, same thing. Do I play the Rek'Sai knowing it's going to go away at round end? Do I maybe go with a different option? Who knows? There's all sorts of really cool decisions to be made. And that brings me to the next card I want to talk about, which is Call the Pack. This is also Rek'Sai's champion spell. Call the Pack is a 2-cost burst spell from Shurima, and it has the Lurk keyword. It says to play, put a card from hand on top of your deck, and then you create 2 random lurker followers in hand. So I love this card because it's got a keyword. This is a spell with a keyword. We don't see them often, but there is precedence for that. I'm thinking, for example, of Lux and her laser, because that has Overwhelm. That's a spell with a keyword. And so we get another one. This has Lurk. Now, it is worth noting again that this isn't triggering when you play the card. This is just another way to trigger that Lurk keyword, meaning if Call the Pack is on top of your deck and you attack and you get the trigger, then that's great. I also like that this card exists because up until this point, one of the things that the Lurk keyword did was it kind of telegraphed to some extent what your draws were going to be. Lurk was only on followers, and so that meant if somebody was attacking and you got the Lurk trigger, then you knew as the defending player they have a unit on the top of their deck. But Call the Pack at least kind of lets you get around that. Now I say kind of because technically Call the Pack is still just a unit. It's just a conditional unit because you've got to play the spell and then it creates units in your hand. So at the end of the day, it's not like a true utility spell. It's not like a Vile Feast or something that you're top decking, but it is at least telling your opponent that you're going to have access to units. So there's some telegraph there, but it's not a guaranteed unit. That being said, the reason that I really like Call the Pack, and the big story here with this card, in my opinion, is the put a card from hand on top of your deck. Because now, when you play this card, not only is this basically a 2-cost draw like it's a 2-cost draw 2, but you put 1 back, so it's not necessarily a 2-cost draw 2, but you're buffing, almost guaranteed you're going to be buffing the cards that you are creating, because you're going to be putting a lurker, let's be honest, from your hand on top of your deck when you play this card, because then when you attack you will trigger that lurk keyword, and then those 2 lurker followers that you created in hand will get the buff. So Call the Pack is a really nice burst speed setup spell where you're getting ready to attack, you pay the cost, you take one of your lurkers from your hand, you put it on the top of your deck, and then you go into your attack because it's burst speed, you don't pass priority, and then you get the trigger, and you get 2 random lurker followers in your hand as well, and they're going to benefit from all of those triggers. So this is just one of those cards that is like the meat and potatoes for the archetype. It does so much for it. You know, it's just a common card, and it's just a spell, and all it does is create 2 random units, and yet that's so reductionist to say all it does, because it enables you to be consistent, and it enables you to continue to play threats, which is important for this archetype. This archetype is going to thrive on just keep playing threats that keep getting bigger. It's not necessarily the same because they're not sharing keywords, but I feel like it's very similar to Mist Wraiths, but I also feel like this is very similar to like Slivers. If you remember Slivers from Magic the Gathering, the more you played, the stronger they got. This is kind of the Slivers for Legends of Runeterra, where you're just going to keep playing the Xerxer units here. Yes, I didn't say Xerxer today. Rek'Sai throws me off all the time because that has the K, and then I want to put it into everything. But Xerxer, well, then we have the Xerxer Wrath today too. We haven't gotten to yet. But anyway, minus my mispronunciations. This is the kind of deck where you just keep playing units, and you just keep jamming them, and they just keep getting stronger and stronger. And so it's just kind of that like relentless inevitability. And again, that's why I think that it really is more of like a mid-range strategy, because it's going to, I think, start low power and then just kind of do one of these where every round you're dealing with very relevant threats. So in that regard, I think that it has a lot of viability against some of the decks that might struggle against Overwhelm as an archetype. I just think they're going to play very similar, but I love Call the Pack. I think that this is just one of those cards that will end up being literally the meat and potatoes of the archetype, because it does everything you want it to do for this Lurk style deck. Now, the last card that was revealed is Xerxer, the Under Titan. This is a 5-cost Shurima follower. Got that lurker tag, got the lurk keyword. It's got a 2/6 body, but on attack, if I have 8 or more power, give me Fearsome, Overwhelm, and Spell Shield this round. So we've already seen the 1-cost Fearsome unit. We've seen the 6-cost Overwhelm unit. Rek'Sai has Overwhelm. This is another unit that is very relevant with keywords that benefit from you scaling with these triggers. And it's at a 5-cost. I am far more excited about this than I was yesterday's Overwhelm unit, even though this requires more setup because you basically need 6 triggers before this kicks off. This also costs less, and so by the time you are hitting that 8 power portion, there's a strong chance that you're playing this along with 1 or 2 other very relevant threats. Like, this is your finisher after a board wipe, or this is something you play to close the game out. Or again, you don't have to go all in on the lurk thing. That's going to be the balance. If you're playing this along with combat tricks and buffs, this could be the kind of card that just catches your opponent off guard. If you're playing this and, you know, it's only a 5/6 or a 6/6 by the time it comes down, you're like 1 buff away from this thing triggering, right? So let's just say, you know, you're playing it and it's round 6 because you are attacking on evens, but you got 1 free attack in from the Bilgewater Lurk unit, right? So you've got 4 triggers. You play it, it's a 6/6, or maybe it's a 5/6 and it's only been 3 triggers, whatever. But you're getting ready to attack. And when you go to attack, you also get to use, say, like the Renekton spell, where you give a unit +2/+0, and you get to give something vulnerable. Suddenly you're giving this thing the +2/+0, and then when you get that Lurk trigger, you hit that 8 threshold, so it gets all of the benefits. And then on top of that, because of the vulnerable thing, and now this has overwhelm, you can choose something with like 1 or 2 health and run that over and get a bunch of nexus damage built in as well. So I do think there is a lot of opportunity to catch people by surprise with this card specifically if you run combat tricks, but that's going to be, you know, that's going to be that gamble, right? How many non-lurk cards are you going to be willing to run in order to get those benefits? I think that there's a lot going on with this archetype, and I love that, because you have to solve the deck building puzzle, and then you have to kind of solve the play pattern puzzle. And yes, the baseline play pattern is very easy. It's literally like play cards with lurk and attack. But the setup to be more consistent, I think, is what's going to separate good players from, you know, just like normal play pattern players here. I think that this archetype might have a great opportunity for skill expression, because the good players are going to figure out the ways to very consistently get triggers and take advantage of those off rounds when you don't start with the attack token, set up those combat tricks. I think this archetype is going to be very interesting in the first few days after the expansion. Long term, I think that, like all things, the puzzle will eventually be solved, and there will be, for the most part, refined lists floating around. There'll be a lot of like tools and tips that good players will have available to teach you how to play the deck. But I think in those first opening days of the expansion, good players are going to be able to get a lot more out of this archetype than just players jamming every card that has lurk on it. It's going to remind me, actually, I think, quite a bit of Deep in that regard, because I think Deep is in a very similar place. I think the instinct when Deep first came out was to jam a bunch of Deep stuff in, jam a bunch of Toss stuff in, and kind of pray that it came together. And then over time, we saw some players like really refine the list and kind of cut the fat, decide which Deep units were worth it, which Toss triggers were worth it, and they really separated themselves as far as Deep players. And I love what I've seen today. Really looking forward to playing it, testing things out. I love Call the Pack. I can't stress enough how much I love this card from a design standpoint, because it does everything you want it to do in the archetype. I know Rek'Sai is going to get a lot of the attention, but I really think that Call the Pack might be one of the most important cards in the deck. So anyway, we made it this far, and you've listened to all of my rambling. Yesterday I was a bit mentally foggy and I kept the video short. Today I'm extra rambly because I'm so excited and my brain is just kind of reeling, thinking about all the different ways that you can kind of play through this. And I'm kind of already trying to figure out which cards I want to run and what support / utility / combat tricks I want to run with the deck. So today I'm very rambly, but if you made it this far, I love you. I appreciate you. I'm actually going to end it here. Let me know what you think about the archetype. How excited are you? What do you think Pyke is going to do for the archetype? Will it be another lurk unit? Will it be something that supports the archetype without having lurk? Something like, you know, you think about how Azir and Misfortune both support Blade Dance even though they don't have Blade Dance. Will Pyke be that for the archetype? Who knows? But let me know what you think. And until next time, may you walk on warm sands, preferably the ones where Rek'Sai is not lurking.